This video will contain spoilers for Final Fantasy VIII and a bit of light spoilers for the original Final Fantasy VII. The year is 1999, and gaming has already established itself as something that's here to stay. Safe to say, the party was getting crazy, and only for it to get even more crazy, with releases like the first Super Smash Bros., Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, Spyro 2, and most importantly, Pepsi Man. How can you look at this and not think that 1999 was a good year for gaming? I mean, come on, it's freaking Pepsi Man. Oh, and Final Fantasy VIII released in 1999. As of writing this, I have recently beaten Final Fantasy VIII, and I have some conflicting thoughts, as I'm sure a lot of people who've beaten this game before do too. I remember hearing before trying out the game myself is that it can feel like it's at odds with itself, and I can confirm that seemed to be the case for me as well, which is kind of a shame since to me Disc 1 has such a promising and solid start. Other people have also expressed a similar sentiment, so let's get on with it, starting with some behind the scenes background. The game's director was Yoshinori Kitase. He was also involved with the story and filled a similar role with Final Fantasy VII. He had a hand with the scenario in Final Fantasy V and VI too. The game's producer was Shinji Hashimoto. Up to this point, the only Final Fantasy game he was involved with was VII as publicity producer. He would then go on and be a producer for Kingdom Hearts 1. The game and battle system were designed by Hiroyuki Ito, and Yoshinori Kitase, Yusuke Naora, the art director and CG chief, was in charge of the FMV and backgrounds. The card game, Triple Triad, was conceptualized and brought into the game by programmer Kentaro Yasui, with character design done by, of course, Tetsuya Nomura, and the scenario writer being Kazushige Nojima. Safe to say, the leads of this project were stacked. According to Wikipedia and a Famitsu Weekly interview, translated by Saki Coxon, taken from the June 5th, 1998 issue. I think it was from 1998 because the source doesn't say the year, but Final Fantasy VIII came out in February of 1999 in Japan, and this issue being June 5th, which I feel like it makes sense to say 1998 because its Into You was to drum up hype for the game. The plot of this game was first started by Nomura and was actually properly written by Kitase. Quote, "Even so, it can be targeting. We left Nomura totally in charge of character design. The first illustration of Final Fantasy VIII was of the main character. We thought what kind of world would create this character and work from there." End quote. According to people who visited the Final Fantasy VIII website from back then, before it got taken down, they claimed that the website stated the game had a staff of over 180 people, and a dedicated team of 35 for the FMBs. That was pretty ambitious, and you can really tell at times. According to Kitase in that same June 5th Famitsu Weekly interview, he states, quote, "What I want to put in 8 was a little reality and combine it with unreality. By showing it through the eyes of normal people, it makes the game more real. I want to take care in that area." End quote. What this quote conveys to me is that Kitase's vision of this game was very much rooted in making us connect with the characters by having them be normal and have a normal perspective. The point is, Kitase knows what makes this series work, being able to connect with the cast, and that's done by making them emotionally realistic to invest in. Oh, and side note, take this with a grain of salt. I have seen sources claiming that Final Fantasy VIII development budget was approximately 3 million yen, or $30 million US. Less than Final Fantasy VII $40 to $45 million budget, which would be $78 to $88 million in 2024 money, adjusting for inflation. One thing I want to point out is how whenever I credit someone for a certain thing, is to keep in mind there's a legit chance that other people probably chimed in with something that made it to the final cut. I feel like it should go without saying. This is pretty common in the entertainment industry. For example, the Final Fantasy Wiki claims that in pages 8 to 13 of the Final Fantasy 7 to 10 Ultimania, Tetsuya Nomura worked on not only Red 13's overall design, but also the idea of having a 4-legged creature as part of the main cast. He also thought about the name Red 13 as well. This is not to take away credit from people who did the bulk of the work of certain stuff, but rather to remember that things like games are a group effort. It's possible that the people who are uncredited don't mind the fact that they're uncredited of that specific contribution or contributions. Again, the reason I'm sharing this and the development background is because it's to help us get a better understanding of how and or why we got what we did. For Final Fantasy VIII, their budget in 2024 money would be 55 to 56 million US dollars. According to a Polygon article, Final Fantasy VII and Oral History by Matt Leon, we actually get confirmation of Final Fantasy VII's overall budget straight from the people who were involved with the game firsthand and from the heads of Square Enix. They share info such as how $10 million were spent on just computer graphics, and how tens of millions was spent on promotion, especially for America. So I don't think it's far-fetched to think that the number given to Final Fantasy VIII is likely the case. In fact, the Polygon article says it will be 61 million in 2017 money. Inflation. Ouch. The reason I'm sharing any of this at all is because I want to convey how much of a damn the people behind this game gave. They were following up with another Final Fantasy just to ride the high of 7. Although that could be the case to an extent. But also because there was drive and passion to keep not just the series forward, but probably gaming as a whole, which can be shown with the more realistic proportions of the in-game models and the more FMVs there are, which I think I remember reading somewhere was 20 minutes more than what Final Fantasy VII had. For the FMVs, they use a little bit of motion capture. It was used to give a more general realism to characters moving, but the team ended up favoring manual animation over relying on motion capture, as Wikipedia claims. Unfortunately, the source that Wikipedia got it from is unretrievable. But passion and vision can only go so far, especially without being checked. And you're going to wonder why Final Fantasy VII will be brought up here and there more than any other Final Fantasy game. Is because the leads on 8 also worked on 7, and when they were working on 8, they would think of 7 a fair share amount of times. They would think of 7 pretty often. See for yourself.
FF8 で思い出すことといえば、FF7 はもう宣伝プロデューサーという形で、プロモーション全般やってたんですけど、8で初めてプロデューサー職ということで、FF7 から 8に変わるというふうにどうやって成功させるかという、ご質問だと思うんですけど、これに対してはやっぱり7で学んだことですね。はい、
そうですね。ファイナルファンタジーの世界観、近未来的な FF 的な世界観についてなんですけども、7でサイバーパンク調の世界観をやったので、
They learned a lot from it, and it's a clever move not just from a business standpoint but from a creative standpoint as well. At least to me, to an extent. Honestly, if you're a big Final Fantasy enjoyer, you should check out Inside Final Fantasy. It's pretty insightful. Now, with that bit of background out of the way, let's move on to our next topic. Our playable characters. I have some thoughts on them. With how much is conveyed about these characters in the beginning, I was just waiting for things to pick up as things went along. For example, the dynamic between Squall and Quistis, which is one of the first dynamics we see, besides Squall and Cypher. I'll get to him later. With the first interaction between Squall and Quistis, there's already a lot being conveyed, like how Quistis can read Squall like a book and predict what next submissive thing he'll say. And how she's been teaching Squall for a certain amount of time. We get a feeling that Quistis wants to have something meaningful between Squall, whether it's something like a legitimate friendship or a well-developed student-mentor relationship. We see how much Quistis cares, which in turn makes us care and want to root for her and for Squall, us, the player, to open up to her. Having the player be on the other end of a dynamic like this can be an effective way of having us invested in these characters, and being invested in the characters is what makes Final Fantasy work so well. But unfortunately, as a lot of people have expressed themselves, she then gets put on the sidelines and doesn't have anything too meaningful after disc 1, at least not often. Another character that suffers from something similar like this is Zell. Zell, just like Squall, has some beef going on with Cypher, with Cypher riding up Zell and Zell wanting Cypher to eat shit. The point is, Zell is established as a go-getter. He's always moving around. His idle scenes in the garden and in battle is him hopping up and down and shadow boxing, I think. His idle animation makes him stand out quite a bit compared to the others, giving him personality. Wow, he's really in the groove. Later, during that awesome prison break sequence, which I think is the beginning of disc 2, Squall saves him, and Zell ends up being like, there goes my hero, and basically becomes a sucker for Squall in that moment, which I think is played for laughs. But point is, to me, it seems that Zell is basically supposed to be Squall's bro, and unfortunately, I don't think they display that too well. I feel like it would have been beneficial had they actually dived in why Zell wants to be Squall's bro, besides Zell just being a friendly, chill guy in general. Like, What does Zell see in Squall? And how come whatever he sees in him makes Zell want to be Squall's ride or die? And don't get me wrong, I think they're both cool, but I feel like going into depth why they will be a cool duo wouldn't hurt. Another character who could have been fleshed out more big time is Sophie. With Sophie, it's a shame she didn't get much. It would have been nice if she did, so we could have a more diverse cast of women in our squad, since in the previous installment we had 2 main women leads, and the other one was an optional character that didn't get that much to begin with, unfortunately. We could have had 3 this time, if Sophie wasn't unfortunately lacking, maybe alongside Quistis. With Sophie, I would have been down if they homed in on the fact that Sophie had a more of a cutesy, naive look compared to the other. I'm not necessarily saying that she is, because she isn't, as seen in certain moments from the game, but there could be people in the universe that think otherwise, only for the reality to be the complete opposite, because bam, she's the one piloting the Ragnarok all of a sudden. Maybe they could have a moment where she reflects on the fact that people always assume things due to her looks, and learn to have those assumptions about her work in her favor. Having people be unsuspecting of her, and then bam, she surprises and wrecks the enemy. What could be the cherry on top of all this is the rest of the cast can be like, oh, so you decided to keep those looks to throw your enemy off guard, huh? And then Sophie's like, what? No, I kept these looks because I genuinely like looking like this. Conveying the message of how being true to oneself can be one of somebody's greatest strengths. Self-love, everyone. For full disclosure, I'm not trying to make the game what I want it to be. I don't remember who said this, but as a lack of a better word, a critic, I'm just someone online talking about their thoughts and feelings on this game. We should strive to help a piece of art to do a better job of what it's aiming to be, rather than what we want it to be or think it should be. I'm not claiming that my way is the true way, but rather a way to convey something about the character to make us care. Any suggestions I make are just that, suggestions. The kind of suggestions I'll make are the kind that still fall in line with the vision of the people in charge of this game and what we got in the final cut. These suggestions can make the game and characters resonate better with people. We should critique these games for what they are and not what we think they should be or want them to be. It is for certain a tightrope to walk on. But enough of what didn't work for me. Let's talk about something positive for a change. I want to focus what did work for me, like, for example, the setting. I really enjoyed the type of world they were going for in this game. I'm fond of Balam Garden, as well as the quirky NPCs that inhabit the place. I think Dolly Town was cool, especially during the set piece of Squall's mission. I like how it was used in the story. The atmosphere during the Disc 1 ending really does feel like there's a lot at stake. Fisherman's Horizons is another dope area where Squall has a great character moment. I dig the whole worn out and run down vibe it has. Oh, and we can't forget the concert scene that happens later on there.
Hey fellas, knock off all that high society crap and play some of this. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Artemisia's castle is a banger of a final aerial location. The music and architecture really seal the deal that this is it. It all ends here. Oh, and I don't know where else to put this, but the model of the remastered version looked great. Up next is the music. The music is once again composed by Nobuo Uematsu. This soundtrack really has an identity of its own. It really does fit this game, and I enjoy it. But of course, you can't talk about the Final Fantasy VIII OST without mentioning 2 of the most notable songs. The intro theme, Libere Fatale, and the song Eyes on Me, performed by Faye Wong. According to Nobuo Uematsu's online profile, the CD single ended up selling over 400,000 copies, making it the record for highest selling video game music disc ever released in Japan at the time. The intro theme also played during the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens during the women's synchronized swimming event. So that's some cool trivia for you. Some of my favorite tracks are the Battle Team, Don't Be Afraid, the Boss Team, Force Your Way, the Dream Trios theme, the Man with the Machine Gun, Starting Up, the Sorcerer's Boss theme, Premonition, and Artemisia's Castle theme, which is called the Castle. Now with that out of the way, I want to move on to the gameplay. And if you know Final Fantasy VIII, you know its gameplay is a little unorthodox. At first, The game doesn't do itself any favors with how the game initially teaches the mechanic. I've heard the consensus that the tutorial kind of just word vomits itself, tutorial after tutorial, and it doesn't help with how some terms are initialized and you barely have any idea what they mean. I have heard people claim it could have worked better had they made the player experience the junction system and comment from themselves as they were being explained. You know, a hands-on experience, which is what gaming is all about. Also, I'm sure everybody and their mother feels that the drawing system is a drag. I just wish there was something that could be done about how much a character can draw magic. Hell, sometimes drawing doesn't even work. Like, I don't know, maybe having a GF that can increase the amount of what is being drawn. Or depending on what GF you have, can dictate how much of a certain magic you can draw. Like, if a character has Shiva equipped, you could have a higher chance to draw more ice magic from an enemy to the other party members that don't have that GF equipped. Something like that. Obviously, it's gotta be balanced, and I'm no game designer. Like, maybe you have to work for a mechanic like that because something like that can be too OP. Even though there are a lot of ways to exploit the drawing system in game to begin with. But at the same time, you really gotta put the work into it to achieve that though. Although, I will give credit, when the junction system works, man, it works well. It works really well. It's just that the approachability and the way it conveys information could be better streamlined. And I understand if people are intimidated by it, especially if they only played a few other Final Fantasy games beforehand. However, even though when you do find out what magic helps you the most, you're most likely gonna use the actual magic very sparingly, because then that will mean you have to do the whole process all over again. But considering that we now have a remaster readily available with a 3x speed up function, the hassle of drawing is significantly less annoying. But then again, it can be hard to spawn an enemy that has a specific magic you want to find, cause then you gotta look up a list where you can find that monster, then travel there, hope for it to spawn, realize you're not getting the amount you wanted, then go to another spot that's on the list, go there, this time I actually did spawn, and repeat until you're satisfied with the amount of magic you draw. So yeah, I can see why people hog their magic, cause the alternative doesn't seem fun, especially for a first time playthrough where you're trying to figure things out on your own for the most part. That's where upgrading the weapons could come into play. You need to make them though. You can't just find them or earn them from things like side quests. To gather the materials you need to make them, you have to grind, meaning you have to beat certain enemies that then drop certain ingredients for what you want to make. Or you can convert certain triple triad cards or items you have into the materials you need. How do you get these cards? Well, by playing triple triad. I mean, you kinda have to go out of your way to find what opponent has what, or you could turn the enemies into cards. Yeah, so there's this ability you can get from Quetzalcoatl, one of the Guardian Forces, or GF for short, that allows you to turn a monster enemy into a card. Oh, GFs not only gain more power from leveling up, but also abilities. Some GFs have exclusive abilities to earn. Yeah, and that's what people mean by leveling up traditionally in Final Fantasy VIII is kinda pointless, as well as the fact that the enemies level up alongside you. Yes, even bosses. These abilities can help the character the GF is equipped to, such as giving the character more HP or increase how much damage your magic does. And some GFs have the ability to convert or refine certain things into certain stuff, like cards into magic or materials, or items into magic, like cards into magic or materials, or items into magic. And depending on what you're trying to get, you might need to refine one thing, so then you can refine it again into something else. Like turn a card using a specific ability like refining a card using a specific ability from a specific GF into an item, and then turn that item into magic with another specific ability from a specific GF, all to get one piece of the puzzle for whatever you're making. It's a pretty layered and complicated system, and the fact that they don't explain that mechanic much or at all makes things tricky for a lot of people. And the more powerful the weapon is, the more challenging it is to find the materials. And to add on how weapon crafting can be a drag, for Squall's best weapon, you need a material called Dragon Fangs. You need 4 of them. The fangs drop rate from a certain enemy decreases the more higher your party's level average is. Yeah, I have no idea how you're supposed to know this without the internet's help. There are other enemies to defeat for the material, but even then, it takes time. I get it, it's the best weapon for Squall, so of course you're gonna work for it. But why the weird drop rate for the material I just mentioned? It's just a bunch of odd stuff that add up together to make this part of the game feel weird and kinda unapproachable. I mean, on a casual first time playthrough, you're most likely not gonna pick up on that. And I don't blame the players to to an extent. Nobody wins. The developers put out this time into the mechanic that people aren't going to figure out, and the players are not going to make the most of this mechanic. They're going to be missing out. I'm not trying to say that this mechanic is a bad idea. I'm actually kind of down for it. Crafting your own weapons sounds pretty fun. It makes the game stand out a bit more. GF don't gain these abilities through XP like how characters level up. Rather, GFs need AP points. For example, if you want to earn the HP plus 80 ability from a certain GF, you need to defeat enough enemies to get 250 AP to unlock it. Oh, and you can only gain AP for one ability at a time per GF. Certain enemies drop certain amount of AP. There are good spots for farming AP at different points of the game, such as the beach near Balam Garden, which is useful when starting out the game, as Quetzalcoatl, a GF you get right from the get-go, can help speed up the process. And the Cactuar Island is useful when you're strong enough to handle the enemies over there. You can also stack abilities that affect stuff like your health or how much damage your magic does, like HP plus 40 and HP plus 20, or magic plus 20 and magic plus 40. As long as you have the corresponding GF who has that ability equipped. There's also the status effects in the junction system, which can give your weapons an elemental type, which can be useful with certain enemies that are weak to certain elements, or defend you from negative elements / status effects, from what I remember. Like I said, when the junction system works, it works well, and it can be really fun at times. Although, like I stated before, the explanation of the overall battle system is a little muddled, and there are unwritten rules that can hinder the overall experience. Sure, a critical aspect of these games is that they also thrive on people replaying them. You will most likely know how to navigate the game mechanics better next time, but then again, that doesn't change how some stuff would still stay awkwardly handled, like the weapons upgrade system that I just mentioned, or how the overall drawing mechanic can be time consuming sometimes. It's an odd situation. Something I want to point out is Kitase claimed in an IGN article by Matt Purslow, published on February 2024, that if he were to hypothetically revisit the junction mechanic, he'd do a significant overhaul, most notably with how to help players approach the system and its difficulty. According to the article, he states, quote, "So, I think I want to return to that and really rework the battle system on Final Fantasy VIII, and make it something where that level of difficulty and approachability for some fans was a lot better balanced. So I think that's the thing I look at most if I was going to look at remaking it." End quote. The point of sharing this is that there is fundamentally a communication issue between the developers and the players. It's not just a skill issue, meaning that people's feeling of the mechanic being hard to approach, making the game a bit more difficult than it should have been, have been vindicated, because the leader in the game admitted that was the case, to an extent. Speaking of combat, let's talk bosses. Man, do some of these whoop your ass like you owe them guild or something. Doing combat are also ways you can receive certain GFs, like the Pandemonium GF can only be drawn from a boss fight. Now that I'm on the topic of a GF, I feel like I should express I really do like how there is a bit of variety of how you can obtain these goobers. Like the first two you get are given to you because tutorial, and then there are the others you have to draw from an enemy, others that are bosses themselves like the brothers and the Cactuar. Oh boy, for me, those GF bosses do not hesitate to make me eat shit. But it's probably a good sign that these bosses messed me up, cause then otherwise I wouldn't have wised up and started actually giving a good look at my magic and figure out what the situation calls for. When I get a GF from a boss fight, man, does it feel earned, especially the Cerberus one, who I was not expecting at all, and tried my best using what little double magic I had laying around. Honestly, looking back, I have no idea how the hell I managed doing something like that on the first playthrough, completely unexpected. What was I thinking? Anyways, these fights were fun and frustrating, but in a good way. I also want to talk about the limit breaks for a minute. The limit breaks here feel a little bit more interactable than in 7. In 8, however, half the cast limit breaks are interactable. Sure, 2 of them are just tapping R1 over and over, but they look pretty cool. It feels great when you time all the squall strikes just right, or when you spam all your bullets as Irvine.
Guns! Oh. Anyway, I started blasting. Bang! Wow. Bang!
And when you barely executed that combo window right before the timer finishes. Nope.
Happy feet! Wombo combo! That ain't Falco! That ain't Falco!
Okay, I look forward to using these limits, not just because they come in clutch, but they're just fun and cool to experience. And speaking of clutching, Quiz's limit break, I think it's the homie laser, really saved my ass a few times, especially with the last few bosses. Oh, and Triple Triad is fun. I didn't delve too much into it for my playthrough, but I think it's a cool idea and definitely conveys Final Fantasy VIII's impact, considering Final Fantasy XIV has implemented that minigame too. And Final Fantasy Rebirth also has a card game that took almost everyone who played it by storm. Wouldn't be surprised if it turns out Rebirth took notes from VIII for that. The reason why Triple Triad is even in Final Fantasy VIII is because at the time, in some parts of Japan, card collecting was apparently a prevalent hobby. Guess some things never change, regardless of where you're from. Oh, and side note, you don't gain gills simply by slaying enemies, at least not normal enemies. No. This time, it acts more of a salary. You get a certain amount of money on a regular basis, and like a legit salary, you can do things to increase your salary. But how? Through the SEED exams, of course. The more of these you do, the more you earn. And honestly, it works. I mean, it's kind of annoying at first, but I mean, like, it gets the job done. But I'm gonna just be honest, it just gives less of an incentive to do random encounters as with the whole thing that the enemies level up alongside you do, which purpose was to prevent level grinding, but it ended up redirecting it elsewhere instead. Anyways, back to the playable characters. I feel like there was a mighty need for these characters to have a this is what it's all for moment, you know? Like a scene that you see that makes you think this is what this character is all about. This is why they're bothering at all. You know? Like how Barrett had the moment with him reuniting Marlene after the playthrough in Final Fantasy VII, or how Red 13 was on the mountain finding out the truth about his dad. Because why did Rinoa just drop the fact that her dad died? I mean, you could make the argument that she had a lot of more pressing matters on her hand, but like not even a little something? Like I don't think anybody said barely anything in the main story cutscenes at least. And Zell never mentions his mother or hometown ever again actually. What would that be like for somebody like Zell who's all about being there for people like Squall? How would Zell feel about the fact he's diving into something that could very much kill him and could lead to him leaving his mother behind all alone? What does Squall feel knowing he must help and protect Rinoa, the only seemingly member left of her family? The space statement could have been a great moment to display how Squall could have let Rinoa die because of something like that. I feel like they could have used Rinoa's father's death as a way to further connect her and Squall's relationship. Like maybe Squall could see how despite the loss, Rinoa is still trying her best and still wants to connect with Squall, close themselves off emotionally. The contrast between the way they both deal with grief could add depth to the couple. You would think that having a smaller cast that consists of no optional characters compared to its predecessor would mean they'd be able to have more focus on this cast instead of stretching themselves thin with a bigger cast that has members that aren't even guaranteed that people would have in their part. Well, unfortunately, it turns out no. Again, they had a solid start, especially in this one, and it just died down unfortunately. Unless you were Squall, Rinoa, Laguna. For the most part, everyone else was put on the back burner. Oh, I guess I should talk about our dream trio, Laguna, Kiros, and Ward. Now, I'm real fond of this trio, as I see a lot of people also are. Laguna is such a goober and exemplifies that energy well, to the point where I can't just help but be intrigued by this character. I don't know how it was done, but somehow Laguna bumbling around like a goober didn't come off as cringy to me, and instead it came off as endearing. Heroes and Ward serving as characters that are a bit more serious really make the trio feel rounded out. Now, I'm familiar with the sentiment that some people prefer the Dream Trio over our main cast because of how fleshed out they feel, and I can totally see why people think that. But at the same time, I kinda don't know if that's fair to compare, since we only seen our Dream Trio only a handful of times, with each segment being so far in between. Therefore, of course, it's going to be less difficult to screw up with that trio, but then again, the fact that people were enthralled by the Dream Trio when they only had a fraction of screen / playtime compared to our main cast has to say something. Again, maybe it must be with the Dream Trio cast being more fleshed out. We know about Laguna wanting to get with that singer, and that he wants to have something with Rain. The fact that he really cares for his friends and others in general and is more open about it. The fact that he's pretty open about caring for his friend and his loved ones and people in general really makes him stick out. Kinda like Idia. Oh, and Laguna, he's one kick-ass fighter. Unlike Squall, Laguna is seemingly cool with the idea of not being a fighter anymore and to just live normally, whereas Squall, his whole youth has been all about being a SEED member till the foreseeable future, which consists of defeating the sorceress. It really doesn't seem much beyond that at first. That is, until Rinoa rolls around and the fact that Squall is still a kid at the end of the day. I feel like it's also a missed opportunity to really bring attention to how these are kids. Sure, they have crazy weapons and magic, but 17 years old for Quistis when she got removed from being a teacher and started going on about her self-doubt and doubt from others of her capabilities. A part of it being due to her age and experience. But then again, with age comes experience. It would have been nice if you got something like that for the others. I think Rinoa got a bit of that from her dad. You know, with the whole disapproving her plans. But somehow, despite all of my problems with this game, I would not consider it a bad game because this game has moments. It truly does. Like the whole space segment I mentioned earlier, and whenever you had to fight the sorceress, yeah, things get real. And I get engrossed with it. The evasion of Badlam Garden, and there are more moments like that. Like I mentioned in my Crisis Core video, Crisis can give characters the opportunity to show what they're really made of. For instance, the segment where you infiltrate the missile base is a good example, especially for Selphie. This moment always struck to me because it's the most where she is proactive. She's the one who gets him in Squall's face and tells him and everybody else what's what. And you know what Squall replies with? He understands. Squall cooperates. That deep down, Squall considers the team's thoughts and feelings. Had the playable characters been more fleshed out individually and as a team, this moment could have been more effective. And let Selphie lead half the team. I mean, you think that Squall will be like, no, only I know what's best, only I have to do whatever, this and that, but yet he has faith in his teammates, and those teammates know what they're doing. This whole segment is basically the whole cast locked in and display when the going gets tough, they'll get through it, and it conveys how they're willing to take risks to save others. Selphie also expressed an emotional connection in the garden and the people within it. See what happens when these guys are properly characterized? You feel things, and that's what these games are all about. Oh my, I just realized I have yet to dedicate a spot for Irvin. Well, he's there, I guess. I mean, I really dig his design though. Again, just like everyone else, he had promise starting this squad, especially with how he hyped himself up as this hell of a sharpshooter and then fumbled his moment big time in front of everybody. But in his defense, the sorceress had a whole ass shield that somehow nobody thought that she might have. Anyways, unfortunately, the only notable thing that the game pushes about him is that he's a ladies man, I guess. I forgot about this, and I was reminded when watching the credits of the game and seeing Irvine flirt with Quistis and Alone, but not Selphie? You know, the girl he wants to be with? Or were we not supposed to take Irvin and Selphie being together seriously? I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just overthinking this. I couldn't remember one of Irvin's few defining traits until the credits rolled. Oh well, it is what it is. Last but not least is Rinoa. Now on to Rinoa. Rinoa herself is an endearing character. She can shoot her dog out like a rocket launcher, and if you can't appreciate that, then I don't think having common sense is your thing. What I'm trying to get at is she's a well-written character. Which makes sense, since alongside Squall, she's one of the few characters that has actual depth throughout the whole game. At one point, she's the leader of... At one point, she's involved with the Forest House and doing all this crazy stuff. But then, she gets humanized in a compelling way by reminding you that, despite all that, she's still a kid. One moment she's kicking ass, and the next, she gets nervous when talking to her crush, and asks said crush to give her a good old bear hug. This is what makes characters interesting, that they're not just one thing. They have layers. The characters can't just be multiple things for the sake of it. All those layers of that one character have to connect one way or another. The reason Rinoa is doing any of this Forest Hour stuff is cause are tired that the adults aren't getting anything done enough in time. So, they take matter in their own hands. But it's still a huge risk since she's still pretty young. There's a lot of nuance in this situation that I feel like the rest of the ensemble cast was missing out on. Maybe she was right for asking help from Seed, but at the same time, can she do it? It's compelling stuff like this that makes her stick out, which I feel like the rest of the cast needs to stick out as well in their own way. 2, I guess. What many people urge as the strongest point about Final Fantasy VIII is also, to me at least, is also its biggest weakness. At least to me, that it's all about Squall and Rinoa. Again, I'm no stranger to couples being the main lead of something, but when it comes to Final Fantasy, it usually doesn't just start with the main lead and their love interest. Every other playable character has something to the point that they can honestly be the protagonist of their own game. For example, Tifa's whole thing of having to be on her own after Nibelheim, maybe in Final Fantasy IX with his character development, Final Fantasy X with Auron. Point is, the lead in the box is usually the hook and not the whole thing. Sure, 9 and 10 came after, and the people behind making these games probably learned a lesson from 8, but that's the thing, 7 came out before and it didn't have that problem, at least not as much as 8. The disproportionate focus of the couple really makes 8 stand out to me, not in a good way. I know I'm far from being the only person who made this observation. Iwamatsu also pointed out how much focus the couple gets. I found this quote on Wikipedia, and the source where Wikipedia got the quote from, I can't find anymore. It's just gone, unfortunately. Uematsu considers it reasonable to have character themes if each character has a highlight in the game. But he found Final Fantasy VIII only focused on Squall Leonhardt and Rinoa Harderly as a couple, resulting in the Aizawa theme. Assuming this is accurate as possible, if someone who works closely with the game also made this observation, then there's gotta be some truth to this whole criticism. And if you're thinking, let this game be different, then why is everyone else here in the first place? Why not just have the couple and 1 or 2 other people be the leads for the whole game? Final Fantasy has been an ensemble kind of series, except maybe recently with 16. I haven't played it yet, but the main cast is pretty small. Okay, enough about our protagonists. Let's talk about our antagonists, the villains. The face of our villains is obviously the sorceress, Edia Kramer, possessed by Ultimisia. Edia herself is a victim throughout all of this as well. Someone who is possessed by this greater force of nature and will do anything by her means to prevent this from ever happening again. From this one action alone, we could already infer a lot, like how she's very in touch with her humanity and is very driven to get stuff done. I feel like this is further supported by the fact that she ends up being playable, which is cool as hell. Up next is the Sorceress Knight, Cypher. Now, Cypher in this one seems to have some issues with people perceiving him as just a boy, meaning that he's just some kid that isn't assured of themselves. The last thing you want someone like Cypher, a loudmouth stuck-up who thinks they're the shit, is that in reality, they're not. They're just pretending. And someone like that, I could definitely see fall for the Sorceress' mind control. Cypher's whole downfall lines up. Something of note that I also found that enriches his character is his cronies, whose names I could never remember, especially since they're spelled so similarly, Fujin and Raijin. Anyways, there's a moment right before the final Cypher fight at the end of this 3 where Thing 1 and Thing 2 reveal they don't want to do Cypher's bidding anymore, not because what they think is being done is morally wrong, but rather because they want Cypher to be the one to make the orders of what the duo should do. They want Cypher to take control again. This is one hell of a way to subvert the expectation when it comes to the trope of the villain's cronies turning their back on their leader. It still stays true to the way those two have been characterized up to this point. Oh, and there's also the opposing military, Galbadia and Garden, who were kind of playing second fiddle to the previous 2 antagonists. They went out with a bang, that's for sure. But they weren't as personal compared to the Sorceress and Cypher. Although the army definitely did a good job at serving a secondary antagonist, that's for sure. They really meant business. Anyways, I'm gonna go back to the Sorceress for a little bit. I feel like a little way to make her more impactful is if the cast was more developed in general. The contrast between individually fleshed out characters going up against the force of nature, that is Ultimisia, who does things out of self-interest / self-preservation, could have given the game's protagonist-antagonist dynamic a bit more of an identity. Now then, let's talk about some themes of this game, most notably, fate. When it comes to Final Fantasy VIII's story, I have problems with how it's presented similarly to its gameplay when starting it out for the very first time. It can be a little much at first. Throughout this whole game, I couldn't get this sentiment out of my head about plots. A sentiment said by someone else I felt could be applied here. It's something along the lines of, having a simple plot can lead to complex characters having the time to breathe and truly resonate with the audience. If that doesn't happen, the audience would start wondering why bother, and end up not feeling attached to the game as much as they could. Then that could take away focus from our cast. Even if you do know for sure that the plot is well thought out, it could fall apart if not presented the right way. And I feel that might have been the case for this game, again with their whole main cast. The general synopsis of this game is that the Sorceress wishes to achieve time compression, which would give her authority over the fabric of time itself, preventing the C Squad, that's us, to be able to take her down since she could just manipulate time and not let that happen. Now again, the most notable theme is fate. This is paired up with the fact that there is time travel present in the game. This is emphasized further with the fact that there are characters coming from the past to stop a bad future from happening, and going even further into the past to set up the future, our present. You see what I mean with the whole time travel thing? The game's antagonist, Ultimisia, is aware she's going to be stopped by the seas in the future, giving her motivation to achieve time compression, which involves things and people from old time periods being taken out from their old era and thrown upon all kinds of different eras that aren't theirs. But in achieving time compression, that brings Seed to Ultimisia to the right spot in time, letting our cast be actually able to defeat her. It's like that one quote from Kung Fu Panda: "A person often meets his destiny on the road he took to avoid it," which was originally said by Jean de La Fontaine. I found that out when I went to look up how much I exactly remember the quote. Other prevalent themes that are present are the destruction and tragedy that war brings, and the theme of self-discovery that comes with these kind of games. You know, coming-of-age stories aimed at teens/young adults. And this is displayed the most with Squall, who was left alone at a young age, implementing that behavior that he would never be able to develop connections like he had ever again in fear of loss. So, he becomes distant, unsociable, disinterested. Can't lose anything if you never had anything in the first place, right? Imagine that. A child, barely old enough to remember your name and face, who vows to push on all by themselves and to find alone one day. That it follows into the present, yet despite Squall's behavior, some people are still willing to extend a hand out to him to prove him wrong. Now that we're on the subject of the relationships, let's talk about that twist. How this whole time, our whole cast have known each other due to being in the same orphanage as children. The reason this was never brought up or remembered by anyone was because of the Guardian Forces. The more they use them, the more they forget. I get what they're trying to do. Having a price for having a price for power. But I feel like this could have been more impactful if there was a bit of foreshadowing for it. Like, maybe when you do the tutorial, Quizzes brings up how there's some myth that using the GF too much takes a toll on people. But no one ever knows what exactly it takes a toll on. And then, bam! You find out you're forgetting stuff and put 2 and 2 together. The reason why no one knows what the GF takes is because no one remembers. Again, I'm not trying to tell this game what it should have been. As a, for the lack of a better term, critic. Again, I'm just some person on the internet talking about their thoughts and feelings on a PS1 game. We should give a piece of our pointers to do a better job at what they're aiming to be, rather than what we want it to be or think it should be. At the end of the day, if you're a Final Fantasy fan and you have yet to play or beat Final Fantasy VIII, I say go for it. Come to your own conclusion. The remastered port is inexpensive, especially when it's on sale. I had to pay a little bit extra to get a physical copy because I'm a physical media kind of person. I try to get my hands on it whenever I can. Now, I don't know where else to put this, but the reason I bothered with Final Fantasy VIII wasn't just because I enjoyed the original Final Fantasy VII, but also because I wanted to get into Kingdom Hearts. And I was aware that the cast from 8 has a prevalent presence in the series, alongside 7 and 10. And you're probably saying, well, the Squall in Kingdom Hearts isn't the same guy from Final Fantasy VIII. And yeah, that's true. But I knew if I learned the background that led to Kingdom Hearts, I would have a better appreciation and understanding of the game. And yeah, I was right. When Squall popped up, and Cloud along with everyone else, I was hyped. I was glad. I wouldn't have any other way. As of writing this, I'm in the latter half of Riku's campaign and Rechain of Memory, and so far, I'm enjoying it. Sure, maybe Rechain drags out a little too much for me, but that's beside the point. I'm basically trying to convey that Final Fantasy VIII does have a voice, and it does have an impact, not just on Final Fantasy, but gaming as a whole. Final Fantasy VIII does have its place in Final Fantasy's overall legacy and the gaming industry, since it kept up the momentum of advancing graphics at the time. I just wish it had its voice a bit more coherent compared to its peers, but from what I can understand from it, that voice, it's pretty good. I'm fond of it, and I don't regret hearing it out. Hopefully, if you're someone that did beat the game, I hope you had a good time, as long as you come to that conclusion yourself and respect the conclusions of others, as long as they're all fair with each other. Thanks for watching. Take care.